I am Alana, and I will be your moderator for the online session. I would like to welcome everyone and the keynote speaker and also our presenters for this conference. Good afternoon, Vaclav Brezina, to our presentation and for being our keynote speaker. We appreciate it. And yes, you may present. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation, and to people who stayed till the end of this wonderful conference. And I will be talking about identifying multi-word expressions in Corpora with some practical examples of how this can be achieved. And if people have any questions, they can either post them in the chat, I assume, or we can have a discussion towards the end. So just to give you some examples here, when you see three words, foreseeable, vitally, and to pave, you might already be thinking about what the word that follows each of these is. So just take a moment to reflect on that. Foreseeable, what would follow? Vitally, what would follow? To pave, what would follow? And if your thoughts were around these words, future, important, and the way, you would be aligned with the majority of British English speakers. We can actually measure that using corpora, and we can see from large corpora, large language evidence, that foreseeable is in 80% of instances followed by future, vitally in 82% is followed by important, and to pave is followed by the way in 76% of times. So there's a very interesting phenomenon in the language that we call multi-word expressions, but there are many different terms related to this, and this is coming from Ray's wonderful book on multi-word expressions, and there's a host of different terms that we use depending on the emphasis that we want to give these things: amalgamated expressions, automated expressions, cliches, chunks, and so on and so forth. And you can see that multi-word expressions is just one of them, but this is a term that I prefer to include a host of different types of phraseological units that we might be able to investigate using corpora. And the theoretical question that we might like to ask is, why do words appear as part of multi-word expressions? What's the reason for this? And is it at all useful if we observe this? There's the psycholinguistic perspective. We know that language doesn't consist of individual words. In dictionaries, we often have as headwords individual words when we search for linguistic expressions. But we know that in the mental lexicon, words appear as part of larger chunks rather than single words. And this is also the way we acquire language, we process language, and language is stored in our mental lexicon. So the chunks or prefabricated patterns, automatized patterns, lie at the heart of fluent production, both in our first language, but also in any additional languages that we may speak. And sometimes when people wonder, I've learned all the vocabulary, I've learned all the grammar, I still can't use my language correctly, especially L2. Many times the answer lies at many times the answer is you haven't acquired and automatized the chunks of language. So these are really, really important from the psycholinguistic perspective, but also from the perspective of language acquisition. There's also the discourse perspective when we look at the evidence that we have in corpora and different discourses, public discourses in particular. So associations and concepts in society are often repeated. So concepts such as a single mother, working mother, give us a particular insight into different values and gender imbalances in our societies. There's no term such as a working father, because that's not considered as something to point out specifically. So different power imbalances, different social constructs are also created through repeated uses of language, and we are encultured into them, and people adopt them as part of the exposure. In right-wing media, we also see very often the concept of immigration, a big societal challenge, being associated with the word illegal. So again, something happens in our mental lexicon as part of the exposure to that, and we might be inclined to perceive or categorize all aspects of immigration into this category. So these are sometimes very consciously created by politicians, certain media, the constructs such as fake news, migrants pouring into a country, and so on and so forth, that sort of underlie certain social values or lack of them, but they are also realized through repeated uses of words and language chunks. So if we study them and understand them, they will also provide insights into norms and values of a particular society. Myself and my co-author, Dr. Dana Gablasova, have been studying multi-word expressions for many, many years. And currently, there's a frequency dictionary of multi-word expressions in British English coming up. It's a unique frequency dictionary that categorizes over 5,000 most common multi-word expressions in British English based on the British National Corpus 2014. These are categorized into thematic categories such as idioms, phrasal verbs, collocations, and so on and so forth. So it's a very comprehensive approach to multi-word expressions in current British English. And the data set that we base this research on is a British National Corpus 2014, 100 million words of current British English compiled here at Lancaster University, 90 million words of writing, 10 million words of speech, 88,171 individual texts in the corpus. It is balanced. It represents the best balance across 8 genres, 52 subgenres of British English, and it's the sort of best representative sample that we currently have about British English, and hence we can answer many different research questions based on this data set. And the one that I'm focusing on today is the question of multi-word expressions in British English. Can we categorize them? Can we measure how strongly they are associated, how frequently they occur in different parts of the corpus, speech, writing, but also in different genres and registers, which is also very, very important. So what we did as part of this research is we looked at collocations, terms for concepts, places, the complex nominals, the terms that we use in corpora, coordinated constructions, phrasal and prepositional verbs, and phrasal prepositional verbs is a hybrid category, light verb constructions, complex linkers, comparisons and similes, idioms, and also formulas in 2 dominant registers, spoken registers, the informal formulas, and then also the academic formulas that are important in academic writing and perhaps also EAP training, and so on and so forth. So each of these categories have different properties and different structures. And the question is, how can we identify them and how can we measure them in a robust way? So let's start with collocations, because collocations have been around for quite a while, and there's an extensive work that has been done on identifying collocations and measuring the strength of association. And based on that, we can then see how we can apply some of what we've learned from collocations to the other types of multi-word expressions. So identifying collocations, the procedure is done automatically using specialized software. And again, we've developed specialized software here at Lancaster University that we call Langsbox, Lancaster University desktop toolbox for analyzers, for analyzing large language corpora. when you have, and this is a very simple example just to illustrate what we mean by collocation and how we actually identify collocations in corpora. Here's this beautiful poem by Robert Burns, A Red, Red Rose. And the great thing, just for illustrative purposes, is that the word love appears repeatedly in this poem in a short stretch of discourse. So we can take the word love as our search term that we call the node, and we might be asking, the question is, what are the typical collocates of the word love in the context of this poem alone? And again, then we can extrapolate and look outside of the poem to large language corpora, millions and billions of words, and then sort of compare this. But let's focus on this example just to demonstrate what is going on statistically. So we first need to identify the word of interest that we call the node, the word love in this example. And then we need to look left and we need to look right, and depends how far left and how far right we want to look. In this example, we are just looking at the first word that precedes and the first word that follows, that we call the collocation window or the span. And within this span, we are trying to identify the collocates. Collocates are the words that systematically co-occur with our node with a word of interest. So in this case, we can ask the question whether my is a collocate of the word love. And you can see that the first use of the word love already collocates with my, but my is also used with other words as well. So how do we evaluate this complex situation? We need some kind of statistical baseline model. And in corpus linguistics, we use very often a random baseline model. We want to compare the use of the word love and its appropriate collocates, such as the pronoun my, in this poem, as opposed to some kind of a random baseline. What I did in the text that is in the shaded box is I randomized the order of the words of the poem just to demonstrate what the poem would look like if the words occurred randomly and were not carefully put together by the author. So this is our random baseline model, what this would look like. And again, we can sort of randomize and re-randomize these words, and they will always appear slightly differently, but it will always be just a jumble of words. Just imagine that you had all of these words written on small pieces of paper. You put them into a box and then you shake the box properly. So this is what would happen here. And now we are asking the question of, is my collocate or strong collocate of the word love in the context of this poem? Well, I can see when I do the counting, and this is based on frequency counting that we often do in corpus linguistics, that my and love appears 3 times in the poem. Whereas if we look at the statistical model, the random model, it will appear just about once there. We can actually write an equation that will give us the exact value over many, many trials. So we don't have to do this empirical. We can mathematically establish the random baseline model. And then we know that 3 is more than 1. So my and love are associated beyond chance. And this is what we've known about the collocational relationship. It is the relationship in language beyond chance. And this was just an illustration of the background processes that we have in mind when we claim that we have a collocate my and love in the English language. And again, we would probably need much more evidence than just a single poem to be able to establish that effectively. But this is what we did with the British national corpus. So once we have these 2 numbers, we usually use some statistical techniques to give us particular values of what we call association measures. there's a host of different association measures that we can use. And if you are familiar with some of the corpus techniques and collocation retrieval, you might recognize some of these collocation measures. I'm just showing them for purely aesthetic reasons here. So MI is mutual information score, MI squared is the squared value of the MI2, log likelihood, Z score, T score, and many other options that we have. Dice, and I think this is the log dice equation that is coming through the funnel for us to just illustrate that there are many different statistical options, including the ones that are appearing on the screen, for us to be able to answer the question of how strongly two words are associated with each other. So if you are interested in more details, you can obviously look this up. I also recommend the third chapter of the book, Statistics in Corpus Linguistics, where this is treated in more detail and thoroughly. So collocation measures and association statistics are well established in the literature. However, the question is, what about the other multi-word expressions? So just to give you a page from the dictionary that to illustrate what sort of expressions we were faced with. And what you can see here is that we have different types of, and this is the page on the category of idioms. You can see that there are many different pieces of information associated with each of the multi-word expressions, their distribution in different parts of the corpus. Is it more frequent in speech? Is it more frequent in academic writing? Is it more frequent in official documents, fiction, television scripts, and so on and so forth? So you can see this sort of tiny graph that we call a spark line that will give you an insight into how this operates. We also indicate the strength of the association in standard terms, if these are sort of two-word associations, but also the dispersion measure and so on and so forth. The letters here, F is fiction, WS, for instance, in the case of in full flow, is written to be spoken. So again, there's a lot of information about the behavior of individual multi-word expressions. But when you look at them and try to sort of categorize them in some ways, when you start with collocations, collocations are two-word combinations. We started with a node and we are looking for the collocate. So a two-word combination, and we can apply a range of statistical measures as we talked about them. However, the problem is that when dealing with a host of multi-word expressions of different kind, the sort of 10 types that I have identified in the previous slide, we will have the words and word combinations of different length. In a nutshell, 3 words. By the time of 4 words. If you think about it, 5 words. Turn a blind eye to something, 6 words. Be in the right place at the right time, an idiom that includes 9 words. In this case, we can't apply the usual statistical measures because they assume just a combination between 2 words to measure the strength. And there will be very complex ways of doing it with, for instance, the last item. So we were faced with the challenge of what to do with this and how to present this coherently to the users. And we came up with a solution, and it would be lovely to hear whether you think this would be useful also in your own context. We came up with a new association measure that is available to all different types of multi-word expressions that we call the percentage association, a measure that can be interpreted very, very easily. Here's the equation, and I'll give you an example of how it works in practice. The percentage association is computed as the frequency of the multi-word expressions that we derive directly from the corpus. And then we look at the individual frequencies of the components, and we take the minimum frequency, so the least frequent component, and then we divide the frequency of the multi-word expression by the minimum frequency of that component, and then multiply by 100 to just get it to the percentage scale. So the idea behind this is very, very simple. If we have these individual words and we want to combine them in some way, what is the maximum value that we can get if we put them together? So imagine, again, these individual words being written on a small piece of paper, and we were trying to play a Scrabble-like game where we are sort of trying to put them together. How would we achieve the most successful situation where all of these would be used in that combination? So this is the answer to that. So I think the best thing is to really sort of demonstrate that with a practical example. And again, referring back to the frequencies in the British National Corpus 2014, so 100 million words of current British English. The expression in a nutshell is a well-known expression in the English language, and it appears 121 times in the British National Corpus. You can check that if you want. You can download the British National Corpus for free and just look at other words or other multi-word expressions if you like. So it appears 121 times. Let's look at the frequencies of its individual components. It should be the other way around. So A as a indefinite article appears 2.2 times per 2.2 million times. In as a preposition appears 1.8 million times, and nutshell appears as a word, as a noun, 128 times. So what we are looking for is the minimum frequency out of all the component frequencies, which is 128. When we plug this into this very simple equation, we can see that in 94.5% of cases when nutshell appears in the English language, it is preceded by the preposition in and the indefinite article. So in a nutshell is a very strong, coherent expression as expressed on the percentage scale using the percentage association measure that we invented for this dictionary, and that we can use across different categories of multi-word expressions, regardless of their type and regardless of their length. Percentages have the great advantage that they are easily interpretable as opposed to some other scales that people might not be as familiar with as the percentages that we use in everyday language. So I will stop here and just say, if you are interested in more details, or if you are interested in exploring multi-word expressions in the English language, either theoretically, there's the dictionary part, or also practically, if you are educators, for instance, with your students, there are the core phrases, but also exercises for learners of English that use the frequency dictionary approach to activating multi-word expressions. There are some tests where you can assess your knowledge of multi-word expressions in English very, very easily, and much more. This is the Routledge Frequency Dictionary series, and this dictionary is just coming up at the end of this month, so it should be available very soon if you are interested in multi-word expressions. And I will stop here, say thank you very much for listening to this talk. And if anyone has any questions, comments, that will be lovely. And I already see one question in the meeting chat. saying, do you have a cutoff score for percentage association? In the dictionary, we report the actual percentage association, so we don't have a cutoff score. So you will have a range from 0.2% to almost 100%, so 98% of times. We have a cutoff point for the frequency of the multi-word expression itself. So the cutoff point would be more in terms of the frequency of the multi-word expression for its usefulness, but the coherence aspect, how strongly these words are held together, would be on a scale, and we don't necessarily need a cutoff frequency unless you have a particular theoretical reason why you want to be looking at very coherent multi-word expressions as opposed to the ones that use very frequent items that can appear with other words as well.
I am going to thank everyone for attending this conference. First of all, I would like to thank our keynote speaker and our presenters for joining us for this conference.